Jess was born in Ohio. Her family was wealthy enough. Jess's father owned a pizzeria, and her mother was a schoolteacher. Jess grew up and enjoyed living with a loving family. But in an instant, everything collapsed when she was 2 years old. The parents decided to go to the supermarket before the new year and congratulate Jess's birthday. They left the little one with a friend of Mom. On the way to the store, her parents were caught in a monstrous shootout of local gangsters. They were passing by. By chance, both were killed, and Jess was left alone in the world. Her parents died. The girl had no relatives. Her family friends did not want to take the baby into their families, and Jess was placed in an orphanage through social services. The girl had a rough time there. In her infancy, she was too active and developed. The teachers didn't like it. The little kids were jealous of her. Why she did everything well, and they didn't like it. Often the students annoyed Jess. They could tie her to her crib, hide her sandals, or paint her face. When she was a teenager, she and the guys from the orphanage worked part-time at a gas station, washing cars for a bit of money. This did not please the local group of children in the area. When Jess and her friends finished the next working day, they returned to the orphanage on the way through the alley. Local gangsters were waiting for them. The guys were with baseball bats. They began to fight, which often happens between teenagers. Jess always carried a small box cutter. Jess accidentally stabbed her attacker in the eye while defending herself and her friends. She was terrified of this. A police officer was passing by. Seeing the fight, he quickly called for reinforcements and an ambulance. It turned out that Jess had wounded the son of a local gangster boss. No one could figure out who was interested in what would happen to the girl. Jess went to jail, the kids' prison. She was afraid of this place. The children in prison were angry and hurt by life, even more than those in the orphanage. Jess cried a lot at night, wondering why she had to bear such a heavy burden. For her excellent behavior, the girl was moved to a double cell. The cell neighbor was Jeanette, a girl from France. She was older than Jess. Jeanette was locked up by accident. She was at the crime scene. A murder was committed in the woods, and the killer left a knife on the corpse. Jeanette saw the man's body lying down. She was scared to give her first aid, threw away the knife, and tried to help, but it was too late. The girl called the police, but the police thought it was Jeanette who killed the man, based on the fingerprints on the knife, and put her in prison. Jess and Jeanette communicated well. Jeanette had more time in prison than Jess. Jeanette once told her that in a good life before prison, she was dating a guy who was French and called him Nicolas. They loved each other, but when something happened that put Jeanette behind bars, he didn't believe the girl was innocent and left her in the courtroom. Jeanette missed him. She truly believed she could be with her lover when she got out. When Jess found out she was going to be released, she was 19. Jeanette asked her to find Nicolas and give him a letter. Jess kindly agreed as she had no idea what to do when she got out. The first thing after the prison, girl began to look for Jeanette's boyfriend. At the address where the girl lived were other people. But Jess wasn't the person who would drop a case halfway. She started canvassing the neighborhood, looking for Nicholas. Her search was a success. One of the neighbors told her that the boy had returned to his homeland in France, and she could contact him via social media. Jess could find him. She texted him about wanting to meet and tell him what was necessary. Nicola gave the green light. They met in Ohio at a pizza place owned by Jess's father. Of course, the girl didn't know that this place was once her family's. Nicola, seeing Jess, was amazed at the beauty of the girl. She was exceptionally slim, had a figure with graceful contours and smooth curves, thick and dark hair, light waves that emphasized Jess's tall neck. Her lips were wonderfully plump, with smooth contours. Her eyes were sky blue, with a green ebbing look deep inside Nicholas. He thought he had met the girl of his dreams, and he didn't care where she was from or what she meant to say. He fell in love with her at first sight. Jess gave the letter away from Jeanette, but Nicola didn't even want to open it. He didn't want to dredge up the past. much less the forgotten one. He was utterly drowned in Jess's eyes. She asked him if he could help her with the housing for a while. Nicholas offered her an option to stay with him, but only in France. He promised her help with work and documents. A girl who had nothing to lose and who had nothing to do but a terrible past didn't give up and went to France with a stranger. Nicola did not deceive Jess. He helped her with everything. Over time, he began to look after Jess beautifully. He gave her exquisite souvenirs and flowers and invited her to the cafe. Jess fell in love with a guy. They started dating, and Jess even forgot that Nicola was Jeanette's boyfriend, her friend from the past. Jess and Nicola got married. Jess's life took on bright colors that were unfamiliar to her. She had a job, a family, and a love she never felt for herself. So they lived a few years in love and harmony. They traveled a lot and enjoyed each other. They understood each other without words, and it was priceless. One day, Jess found out she was pregnant. She told her lover, and he was pleased. Young people waited for the miracle for 9 months. A healthy boy named Jack was born. Jack was a copy of his father. Her parents loved their son very much. Jess gave him all her warmth and affection, which she missed so much as a child. There was no sign of trouble as the doorbell rang one day. Jess opened the door and saw Jeanette. Jeanette understood what was going on immediately. She could not forgive her friend for starting to live with her lover. She wanted to destroy their whole world, but she didn't say a word to Jess. She left the place silently. Jeanette set their house on fire at night when everyone was sleeping. Jess and Nicola escaped, but lost their treasure, their son Jack. Time stopped for them. They couldn't believe it had happened to their family, to anyone but them. Jess felt unhappy again and remembered how she was a child in an orphanage. Furthermore, there was no human being near her. Only Nicholas was there, and her child was not there. It was a terrible shock for any mother. Jess stopped smiling. Her life turned into a dark hell. She hated Jeanette. She wanted to find and kill her. Nicholas felt less sorry for her. He paid less attention to her and went into himself. Jess found out where Jeanette was living and went to visit her, but she couldn't kill her either, and she wanted to look her in the eye. When she saw Jeanette, Jess was stunned. Jeanette was bald, terribly thin and pale. She was sick and had an incurable disease. It was cancer. Jess realized that life had already punished this woman without her involvement. She thought in her head that, in this life, everything comes back as a boomerang whether you like it or not. Of course, the pain of losing a child will never be alleviated, but it began to blunt and hide deep in each of their hearts. After a while, strange things started to happen in Nicholas and Jess's lives. Jess began having nightmares at night. She became afraid to go to bed and to go to sleep alone. The first thing Jess dreamed was that, in the dark, a girl walked alone into a room she didn't know. A wall covered with pictures of her children, and every child in a photo invited her to his room. Jess was horrified by this. This dream was repeated many times. It tormented her and prevented her from sleeping. She began noticing that she was seeing the children from her dreams on the city streets in real life, which frightened her even more. She saw all this in reality as hallucinations. She shared this with Nicholas, but he just laughed at her and didn't understand her pain. Nicholas suffered in his way, so all his love for Jess may have died forever. Jess went to a psychologist, and she was starting to think she was going crazy. The therapy session didn't help her. The girl was confused about what to do and who could help her. She accidentally met a woman in the street, a spooky-looking older woman. The woman was old and ugly, with her hair torn and a basket in her hand. She walked up to Jess, looked into her eyes, and waited silently. Jess was frightened, but stood there and did not run away from the older woman. So they stood for a few minutes. Suddenly, the older woman told her that she had been cursed and if she kept it that way, Jess would soon be gone. She asked the old lady what she could do, and she said she could help her if she believed in her. Jess agreed. The next day, Jess went to the address given to her by the older woman. She took a long drive to the place far away from the city. She didn't say anything to her husband. There she found a house with a sinister-looking older woman and went to her. The woman was waiting for her. She began to perform a ritual unknown to Jess, after which Jess fell asleep for 2 days. Jess woke up happily asleep with a happy heart and saw the older woman lying on the bed, and she didn't seem so disgusting to Jess. The older woman called Jess to her place and said, "You need to leave France for your homeland. You will be pleased and have a daughter there." Jess could not believe her ears. She thanked the older woman and went home, reflecting on what had happened to her. At home, she discovered Nicola was leaving her for another woman. Jess wasn't even upset. She was preparing for a new phase in her life. She packed all her things, bought a plane ticket, and flew to Ohio. There she bought herself a small house. She started renovating her garden, which helped her not to think about her hard life and the death of her child. She had no more nightmares and was sleeping soundly. She had peace of mind. She got a job. She decided to go into floristry, and she began collecting combinations of flower bouquets. It calmed her. One day a man came to her for flowers. He was familiar with her face. She recognized in him her friend from the orphanage. They got to talking. It turned out Marcus was from the same orphanage. He worked as a surgeon in Ohio. Marcus lived alone and never had a family. He recently found out where his mother was buried, who had placed him in an orphanage, and he came to buy her flowers to take to her grave. He asked Jess to accompany him to the cemetery. Jess felt his soul, so she did not refuse. He waited until her shift was over, and they went to his mother's grave. Marcus silently put the flowers on her grave without saying a word. On the way back, they went to the cafe. The weather was cold and snowy outside. They talked for a long time and reminisced about all the sad and funny parts of life at the orphanage. They remembered how they ended up together in the alley and how, after the terrible fight, Jess went to prison. Marcus said that after the war, the guy Jess stabbed in the eye went to the orphanage to look for Jess, and he wanted to apologize for putting Jess in prison. His vision was barely injured. There was only a tiny scar under his eyebrow. Jess couldn't believe her ears that a man had realized his mistake. Marcus and Jess started dating and moved in together pretty quickly. It was New Year's. They spent the New Year's together and decided it was a new episode in their lives, and they didn't want to break up, and they were going to live together. It was a Christmas miracle for both of them, and for Jess, it was also a birthday gift. They spent that winter together. Jess told Marcus how she lost her baby and how unhappy she was all along. Marcus worked as a doctor all his life after the orphanage, helping people and living with no one, always being alone. A few months later, Jess and Marcus learned they would become parents. This was unexpected news for both of them, and very happy for them. Jess remembered the older woman's words that she would have a daughter. At the ultrasound, Jess learned the sex of her baby, and it was a girl. Jess smiled and realized that everyone could be happy in life. Just everyone gets their happiness at different times.